Well, good Wednesday evening. You made it halfway through the work week. Sit down, relax for the next hour, and welcome to Spicer & Company. I'm Sean Spicer.
And I'm Lindsay Keith. Well, Sean, President Biden held his highly anticipated summit with Russian President Vladimir Putin today. The two leaders met in Geneva, Switzerland for more than 3 hours this afternoon and discussed Russian human rights violations, cyber attacks, and Ukrainian sovereignty, amongst other things.
Yeah, following the meeting, the two leaders held separate news conferences, which is not normally what happens. And Putin took the chance to spread propaganda. And because they were solo, he wasn't getting challenged on this at all. He said that, check this out, recent cyber attacks in the U.S. were coordinated in the U.S. and Russia had nothing to do with it. He also danced around questions about him killing his political opponents by bringing up the Capitol Hill riot, Black Lives Matter. I mean, it was sort of just like, I'm going to talk about everything else. And after he was done, then President Biden took the stage. Here's what he had to say.
I told President Putin my agenda is not against Russia or anyone else. It's for the American people. That's why we're going to raise our concerns about cases like Alexei Navalny. I made it clear to President Putin that we'll continue to raise issues of fundamental human rights. Responsible countries need to take action against criminals who conduct ransomware activities on their territory. This is not about trust. This is about self-interest and verification of self-interest. That's what it's about. So I virtually almost anyone that I would work out an agreement with that affected the American people's interest, I don't say, well, I trust you, no problem. Let's see what happens.
Well, joining us now with more on today's summit is Newsmax White House correspondent Emerald Robinson. Emerald, good to see you. You know, this was Biden's first European trip. So how did it play and what was the reaction so far?
Well, it's been very interesting. As Sean said, it is unusual that the two would have their solo pressers. I was actually in Helsinki in 2018 for the Trump-Biden summit where they did a joint press conference, and clearly Trump got heavily criticized, as he did for about anything he did, for his responses in that press conference. But it's also interesting that Biden is actually getting some pushback from the corporate media that has largely lobbed him softballs through all this. He attacked a CNN reporter today when she asked if he had confidence in Putin about one of the issues, and he went at her. He later tried to backtrack it and apologize. But there were some major notable moments from that press conference. As you also noted at the top of the show, human rights was a topic on the table for the two leaders, specifically human rights abuses by Russia, but also Vladimir Putin taking the opportunity to turn the tables on the United States, suggesting that the defendants in the January 6 cases who are being held in detention pre-trial, not being convicted of anything, sometimes in solitary confinement for 23 to 24 hours, suggesting that those are human rights abuses as well. When President Biden was asked about that today, he suggested that these defendants are criminals, even though some of them, many of them, most of them have yet to be tried. And he also suggested that they killed one police officer. But as you'll recall, the medical examiner here in Washington, D.C. ruled that Officer Brian Sicknick died of natural causes, and there are still questions about his death. Then there's also this, I think it may be the most interesting part, is that there was the question of cyber attacks. That was one of the major topics for discussion. When President Biden was asked essentially how he held Putin accountable for that, he said he provided a list of industries, of sectors that should not be hacked, which begs the question, what industries should be hacked then?
That's a great question. All right, well, that actually gives us a lot to follow up with. No one better to follow up. Emerald, thank you so much for that. We got a lot to break down here. Did President Biden hold his own with his counterpart from Russia? Joining us with reaction is Florida Senator Rick Scott. Senator, great to have you back.
How you doing? I mean, I'm continuing to be disappointed. I just think he's not standing up to dictators. He didn't stand up to Putin. I mean, as you can tell, nothing came out of it. So I just think he's not helping us. He doesn't have a backbone.
Well, the thing that was interesting, one, Emerald just brought up this idea. You're handing him a list and saying, here are areas that we shouldn't attack, shouldn't be subject to cyber attacks, which Emerald, exactly right. It's like, so hit everything else. But also, during that Biden presser, he says, I raised a lot of issues with him. I've always been told that President Putin is a man of action, not words. If we're just raising issues with him and not telling him there's consequences, then how productive of a meeting could this have possibly been?
I'm a business guy. When you have a business meeting, what you say is, these are the issues. What will you commit to do, and what will I commit to do? As you can tell, nothing came out of it. There was no commitment by Putin to do anything. So, and by the way, at the end of the meeting, what you always do is you make sure you go over it just to make sure everybody understands. What did we talk about? What are you going to do, and what am I going to do? Did you hear any of that? No, of course not, because that's not what Biden does. Biden just wants to have the title of president. There's not a dictator around the world that I've seen so far that he's going to hold accountable. I mean, he wants to get back in there, Rand Daly. He's not hold she accountable. I mean, so nothing's going to, I'm really disappointed.
Ben Rhodes, Obama's former deputy national security advisor, said this morning that giving Putin a meeting was a victory in and of itself. As Sean said, this man, actions are louder than words. It showed him that that Russia has parity with the U.S. Did you think we made a mistake by giving Putin a meeting in the first place, especially without any conditions?
The way I look at it is I'm always open to having a meeting with a purpose. And then when you finish the meeting, you say, did I get what I want? All right. But I would say, this is what I walked in the meeting with my goal. All right. Did I reach my goal? Did you hear any of that? Of course not, because that's not how Biden thinks. So he doesn't think about having a goal to get something accomplished. I mean, why is he in this job as president if he doesn't have a purpose? So in these roles, these roles, you have got to have a plan and work your plan and be honest with us. Did something happen? Did you get what you wanted? It's okay to fail, but he doesn't want to acknowledge that nothing happened.
It's interesting you bring that up. As a businessman, you're right. I always, when people ask me, can I have a meeting? I'm like, for what? What is the goal? Why are we meeting? What do we hope to get out of it? And you're absolutely right, Senator. It doesn't seem like there was an objective there, right? In the press conference, Putin dismissed Russia's role in the cyber attacks, right? He starts blaming all of this other stuff that's going on. He blamed it happening from the U.S. The Russian Navy's just off the coast of Hawaii. I don't feel like that we're able to define success coming out of this because, we didn't get the two individuals that are being imprisoned there back. We didn't tell them, hey, get out of Hawaii, keep your Navy away from us. There's nothing that we can point to and say, here's what we got.
Because he didn't go in with anything. He went in with no plan because what he wanted to do is hey, I'm the president, okay, and I had a meeting, but he didn't say, oh gosh, maybe at the end I want to make sure something happened. He didn't go that far. Because what you would do is you'd start out by saying, like you just said, Sean, what was our purpose and what's our goal? And look, you have meetings and sometimes you don't get your goal, but you have a plan and you are honest. He needs to start being honest with the American people about all these issues. He is getting nothing done. He's had this job, for 5 months? Nothing but bad things have happened. The border's still a crisis. Our schools are still not open. You look at what's going on. Inflation has picked up like crazy. He's not solving a problem because he's not addressing a problem. He just wants a title.
This was his first overseas trip. He's always touted his foreign policy experience. What grade would you give him if you had to give him a grade on his trip?
Well, so far you'd have to give him a D. Because what happened? It comes down to, it's real simple. What good happened? Why did you take the time and spend the money and do this for no purpose? What has come out of this? The other thing you think about, in his meetings with foreign leaders so far, all he said is, hey, will you guys raise your taxes so I can raise my taxes here? That seems like that's the only thing that's come out of these conversations. And by the way, you're back in the club. Gosh, Macron says something nice about you. Isn't that wonderful? And, Boris Johnson says something nice about you. Look, I want to have a relationship with our allies, but we have to do it purposeful for American citizens. I represent people in America. We've got to we got to focus on our country. And are these things good for our country? That's the way he's got to think about it. Not, oh gosh, I just want to make friends with everybody.
Yeah. It's funny, by the way, I don't want to get off on a tangent, but he brought President Putin some gifts. He brought him aviators like he wears, and he brought him, some kind of statue, whatever. And everyone in the press was talking about what he gave him. And I was like, no, he also gave him a pipeline. But I want to change subjects real quick because you brought up the border. You were a former governor of Florida. The current governor, DeSantis, is announcing that he's sending state law enforcement officials to Arizona and Texas to be on the border. As a former governor yourself, would you have done this?
Well, what I think my role would then in the state figure out how is it impacting us. I've talked to sheriffs around the state. I actually talked to 2 sheriffs today in Florida. And what they're saying is there's a significant amount of fentanyl that's coming across the border and getting into Florida right now. And we're losing people. I mean, I can't imagine what Biden is doing here. He sits there. American citizens are losing their lives because of his actions on the southern border. He's acted to cause this crisis. It's not inaction in his part. While he's still not gone there, but I mean, what I would be doing is focus on how can we help our law enforcement in Florida stop this fentanyl, because that's the biggest thing that's happening right now. We'll see if there's other problems that are going to come up. We know there are a lot of people that come across the border that we don't know what their purpose is. They're clearly not being apprehended on top of all the people being apprehended and released. So the biggest problem I see right now in Florida is that fentanyl. So my focus right now is I'd be focused on the fentanyl problem in our state.
Okay. All right. Senator Scott, thank you as always for coming on.
All right. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
You bet. All right. The Republican National Committee is done with presidential debate moderators taking the side of liberal candidates and is actually threatening to boycott future presidential debates unless things change. We're going to ask RNC Chair Ronald McDaniel about that next.
The Republican National Committee is threatening to boycott future presidential debates unless the Commission on Presidential Debates makes some serious changes. In a letter, RNC Chairwoman Ronna McDaniel wrote this: "For too long, the CPD has failed to meet its responsibility to presidential candidates and American voters nationwide in providing a neutral forum for candidate debates. The situation is intolerable, and the RNC can no longer give the CPD the benefit of the doubt." Well, joining us now is RNC Chairwoman Ronna McDaniel. Chairwoman, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Great to be with you.
And I also want to note that today is official start of your podcast, Real America with Ronna McDaniel. So congratulations on that.
Thank you. I'm so excited. And everyone tune in, go to GOP.com. And my first podcast with Governor Kristi Noem, who does a great job.
That's awesome.
Great guest.
Yeah, great guest. Great way to kick it off. But I do want to ask you about this letter that you gave to the commission. You gave them a July 31st deadline to get back to you on reforms to these presidential debates. Has the commission responded yet?
They have not yet, but I think most Americans would agree with the really reasonable actions we're asking them to take. Remember, in 2020, the debates started well after many states had started voting. They changed a debate to virtual without consulting the candidates. They have many members of their commission that were vocally disparaging of President Trump. They should be neutral. And they don't have term limits. There's no transparency. So many things need to change with an organization that has a huge impact on how we select the President of the United States. And right now it is tilted towards the Democrats. And Republicans, frankly, have to fight harder and make sure that we don't put our candidate in 2024 in the same position.
Yeah, I think it's great that you guys are getting ahead of this because it is so important. I think all of those reforms make a ton of sense. This commission has gotten off where initially was and why it was formed. But I want to switch topics a minute. I assume, and correct me if I'm wrong, that you launched this podcast to get your message out and to get the message of governors like Kristi Noem and other Republican leaders. It's interesting. Week after week, I keep watching so-called reporters treat Republican candidates, Republican officials, Republican policies with such disrespect and have truly become mouthpieces of the Democratic Party. And so let me just ask you philosophically, do you think it's a good idea to say, from an RNC perspective, we're not going to book people on outlets like CNN or MSNBC or talk to outlets like Politico or the Washington Post? Do you think that actually will help the situation as opposed to being complicit in trying to be part of them?
I think it's both. I think we have to banter with them and go back and forth and hold our own. But we also have to find other outlets to get our voice heard. And that's why this podcast is so important, because Republican governors were being vilified and attacked by the media left and right as Cuomo and Newsom and Whitmer were being adulated and applauded. And now, a year later, Republican governors had it right and Democrat governors failed. And we see this all across the country as we're watching Republican states come back, as we're watching the movement from blue states to red states. This is a critical time in our country, and shows like yours and my podcast give Republicans an outlet to tell the truth, to tell a story, and not have the speaking or the propaganda machine for Joe Biden skew it and not tell the truth to the American people about what actually happened through this pandemic.
Right.
Well, speaking of telling the truth, the media and the Democrats are spreading misinformation when it comes to Republican voter regulations. So what is the RNC doing specifically, one, to push back on that narrative, and then two, to counter Democrats' misinformation on voter regulations because they just aren't getting it right?
Yeah, they've been so dishonest. And to see Joe Biden say that the Georgia law was a Jim Crow law is actually so disgusting, because it disparages the horror of racism, which we all think is abhorrent, and it uses racism for a political talking point. There is nothing racist about these laws. These are laws that expand voting opportunities. They are laws that put common sense measures in place that most Americans agree with, like voter ID, like security measures where you have cameras watching drop boxes, things that we all know should be part of the election, making it harder to cheat and easier to vote. And Democrats will use anything to further their agenda, even saying that this is racist, which is just not true. So we took out billboards in Georgia. We took out op-eds in Black-owned newspapers in Georgia, letting them know about the $100 million that left their state as the MLB moved their All-Star game to Colorado, a 10% Black populated city in Denver from a 55% Black populated city in Cobb County. So we're holding them accountable. You're going to see more and more of that. But we're not going to let Joe Biden and Democrats continue to divide our country along racial lines and lie to the American people about things as important as voter ID laws that secure our elections.
Yeah, I think we need to keep reminding people how all of these different states, whether it's Georgia or Texas, actually contrast with President Biden's home state of Delaware that's completely controlled by Democrats. Chairwoman, I want to thank you for coming on and letting us know about the podcast. It's, as you mentioned, a great way to get your message out, but also the governors and the other policymakers. So best of luck with it.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
You bet. All right, coming up, actors becoming activists is on the rise. Former TV host Chuck Woolery is going to be here to shed some light on why this is happening. That's next. Chuck Woolery has witnessed the evolution of it all, and he joins us now to discuss. Chuck, welcome to the show.
Oh, I have, and thank you so much for letting me on. I appreciate it. You're very brave.
Oh, well, that's worrisome. But let me ask you, you've seen this evolution in Hollywood where it's almost now, if you're an actor, you have to be an activist and then weigh in on everything that comes out of Washington or voting laws. When do you think this started and why?
About 1950. I mean, seriously, this has been going on forever. It's after the 50s and then that whole thing, it really started. And, Hollywood is kind of like, they are the left. They represent the left, and they like being on the left because they really think they're on the cutting edge of a downward spiral of America. And why, I really can't explain it other than it seems to be the thing to do. There is no reason on the left anymore. And I'm not talking about the Democrat voters. I'm really talking about the Democrat Party. It has left all reason behind. And cancel culture is like, it will come for you eventually. I mean, here's Tom Hanks, who has accomplished, incredible things as an actor, as a producer, I guess, as a director, perhaps. And his biggest sin is he's white. And yet Robert Downey Jr. literally appropriated a black man in Days of Thunder or something like that. I can't remember the name of it had something to do with thunder. And it was a big hit, and no one said a word to him. But, you can't really be a successful advocate to people who have an incredible lust for power. It's vicious. It is absolutely vicious, and they will take you down, and eventually they will come for you, even if you're on their side. And he is on their side.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
He's
Well,
like
to your
Rob
point,
Reiner
Chuck,
in a way. I mean, Rob Reiner is as vocal, but so is Tom Hanks. And eventually
Right.
they'll come from Rob Reiner too.
Yeah, nobody is safe in the era of cancel culture, even Broadway extraordinaire. Lin-Manuel Miranda, the creator of Hamilton, everyone loves him. You know, he's
Right.
being shamed for not having enough Afro-Latino diversity in his latest project, In the Heights, which is based on a story in Washington Heights, New York. But Lin-Manuel actually apologized for it, saying in part that in trying to paint a mosaic of this community, we fell short, and I'm truly sorry. I'm learning from the feedback, and he goes on and on. But it seems like these days, it's not just if you're Latino or if you're Black. If you're not Latino enough or if you're not Black enough, then it's not enough. Is that a fair standard?
No, of course it's not. You're never childish enough for the left. I mean, this is so childish. I apologize. I'm so sorry if I offended anybody. I offend everybody by saying hello. I mean, you know, come on. Everybody is so offended on the left by everything that's done today. And they've all got their little, you know, niche that you have to fall into. And they're all over the place. So you don't know exactly which one to fall into. So it's very confusing. And, they come after me all the time. Believe me, I have a company that I work for. They are constantly trying to get me fired. They love to get me fired, and they may get me fired. I really don't know, but you know, someone has to stand up for the truth, and the truth has become really a very, very small thing. You got to really search to find it these days.
Chuck, the thing that you're saying, though, is so amazing, because when I talk to people who are sort of subject to this or are worried, they're scared, right, for exactly the reason that you just brought up. They'll say, I just don't want to say anything. I can't because I'm afraid of getting canceled. I'm afraid of getting fired. But you have a platform. People know who you are. You can go somewhere else. This is the problem, though, isn't it?
Not really.
They have scared people.
That's not true. Look, I turned 80 years old. I'm older and wiser. I have a company that I work for, and if they're unhappy with how people who are five guys in a basement that represent to them 1 million people who are saying, we don't like this guy, you need to get rid of him, we don't like what he's saying, I can lose my job too. But I must tell you, I mean, I'm standing up. What I've gotten criticized for, I'll tell you 2 tweets that I got just absolutely beaten up by that both trended. The first one was, I said, everyone is lying to us. It's WHO, the CDC, the doctors on television we depend on for our public safety and health. They're all lying to us. That was converted into the trolls to, oh, so you deny that COVID is out there. That's not what I said at all, but they decided that's what I was going to be known for. So that spread like wildfire. The second one was critical race theory. Comes from critical theory from the Frankfurt School in Germany in the late 30s. And Hitler hated Marxists. They were Marxists, so he kicked them out and he threatened them with their lives, and they ran for their lives. And they ended up on the campus of Columbia University, where they still reside to this day. That's the truth. Yes. But no, it's not good enough. You can't tell the truth because if you do, it's offensive to the left because they reside in a pool of lies.
Right. Chuck, well, thank you. I hope to have you back because there's so much to break down. I appreciate you sharing it with us. I am. We'll have you soon.
All right. Thanks so much for having me on.
Take care.
Appreciate it.
You bet. All right, guys. Well, the Biden administration mishandles the border crisis. Children are at risk. The shocking truth about child sex trafficking, that's right here next. Stay with us.
A shocking image that you're looking at, a 5-year-old girl wandering alone on our southern border. But thankfully, she was saved. San Diego Border Patrol agent tweeted this: "The most vulnerable populations are being exploited for financial gain. Thankfully, our agents encountered this child before any harm could befall her." Well, Saved in America, a group of retired law enforcement and military officers, is working to locate missing children and end sex trafficking in America. Joining us now from Saved in America is Stephanie Myers. Stephanie, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate the focus not only on a national issue, but specifically here in Southern California.
Absolutely, and thankful for what you all are doing for this prominent issue. The interesting thing, though, Stephanie, the Biden administration uses this term all the time. We want to reunite children with their families when they're talking about migrant children, but they mean reuniting with a relative or anyone that they may know in our country. Your organization, Saved in America, is working to reunite missing children with their families as well. So how is that different, and what does that actually look like?
Well, the interesting thing that Saved in America is doing, we work with parents and law enforcement to locate U.S. children that are missing and have run away. What's going on right now at the borders that people need to be aware of is on a daily basis, thousands of kids are being unaccompanied over the border into the United States. For example, close to 19,000 children, Census Administration has been put in place, have crossed the border by themselves. The minute they make it into the United States, they will be picked up by a cartel and they will be used for child pornography and or sex trafficking. Unfortunately,
So, can I ask, when you say cartel, I apologize, but when you say this, it blows my mind. I think of cartels on the other side of the border, right? Mexican cartels. I want you to explain this to viewers and frankly to me. When a kid comes to the border and crosses over, if they're not reunited with a family, these cartels are on our side of the border. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, 100%. We call it the evil triad. Not only do you have the cartel, you also have street gangs, but you also have the prison gangs. And unfortunately, our leadership here let a lot of prisoners out during the pandemic. So for example, the Mexican cartels in our neighborhood in Southern California and probably across through Texas, they can sell a drug once, where they can sell a child as many times as they want. This is a billion-dollar industry. It is a billion-dollar industry, and unfortunately, the Mexican cartels have turned to our children versus selling drugs now.
Why don't we hear more about this? We hear about the drugs, right? But I mean, I know a lot of Republicans talk about this all the time. Mm-hmm. I don't think I really have an appreciation for what you guys are doing, the magnitude and the scope of it. But I mean, how many kids are we talking here, and why is it not being reported on?
I would love to know why it's not being reported on. I mean, right now, 60% of the Latin American children that cross our border alone will be picked up by the cartel. If you look at statistics, as of March this year, over close to 19,000 kids have crossed the border. Now, when I say kids, minors. If you look a year ago in March, we were only at 9,300. They've gone up. Unfortunately, I don't know why it's being covered. It is a huge issue. San Diego is the second largest corridor for now, not only drugs, but sex trafficking. There's a lot of missing kids. I can tell you with Saved in America, because we are, built on Navy SEALs, private investigators. We're working with law enforcement. We locate the pimps. We are working and showing and identifying who those pimps are. In fact, we've even ensured that some menus for children are being removed from hotels that are in San Diego. We have to stay on top of it. So it's not only just local children in our communities, it's people that are coming up from Mexico. It's the same pimps, it's the same evil triad that are taking our children and selling them. And unfortunately, you may or may not know, once you sell them or they move up. So when I say we're the Western Quarter, they're all headed north. So then once the children leave, it's harder to locate them.
I mean, just thinking that there are menus for children is disgusting and so disheartening. But I do want to ask you, with that increase, it's a 1,300 increase in children we're seeing being trafficked to our country since last May. Why the increase? Where is this demand coming from?
Great question. So when the coronavirus hit, kids were at home. They were online more than ever. Zoom, games, Snapchat, Instagram, Facebook. 70% of children that are sold online, and they're also being trafficked via online. You have no idea who you're talking to on the other side of that application. So when the pandemic hit, our numbers grew. Our numbers grew exponentially due to the pandemic, and that's why you're seeing a large increase. It's very important that parents really focus on children. For example, a child who has a smartphone, there are kids getting text. 7 out of 10 children have been sexted if you have a smartphone. And so that's one thing you really need to stay on top of is we're still semi under lockdown out here. There are still communities in California that are not in school. They're still on Zoom. These kids are online, and that is where our predators are locating all of the children. Wow. They lure, and then they groom. Mm-hmm. Yep.
Wow. That is unbelievable. Stephanie, appreciate so much what Saved in America is doing. And I pray that we are able to end sex trafficking in this America and end the demand for it. But thank you for what you all are doing.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
All right. And if you want to find out more about Saved America, you can go to savedinamerica.org. Well, coming up, the border crisis may be in the hands of the Biden administration, but we can fight back to secure our country. Stephanie is going to join us after the break, along with former Customs and Border Protection Commissioner Mark Morgan. That's next.
All right, continuing where we left off a moment ago, children ending up in the hands of traffickers is just one of the many consequences of an open border. Texas Governor Greg Abbott is taking matters into his own hands. He announced that he is going to continue building the wall that President Trump started. Former acting Customs and Border Patrol Commissioner under President Trump says Texas is right to stand up for itself because we cannot count on the Biden administration to secure the border. Stephanie Meyer of Saved in America rejoins us along with former acting CBP Commissioner Mark Morgan. Good to see you both.
Thanks, Sean.
Stephanie, I want to start with you. A lot of our viewers may go, and I recognize her face from somewhere. You were on The Apprentice. That's where I think you met Donald Trump. He actually, as far as I understand, asked you to delve into this subject, this area. Why?
Well, considering where I live in San Diego, we are the second corridor for not only drugs, but human and sex trafficking. The interesting part when we had this discussion, it was right before he signed his second executive order in January to protect our children from online predators. So it was perfect timing, and something that's near and dear to my heart was to ensure not only my community is safe, but to also try and save the children across the nation.
Commissioner, I do want to go back to what Sean was saying about this wall that Governor Abbott is starting. You penned an op-ed applauding Texas Governor Greg Abbott for doing what you say the Biden administration cannot. They're not handling this border crisis well. But will Abbott's wall be successful, and why?
Yeah, it can be. First of all, we know that not only this administration isn't doing anything about it, they actually created it. We have a current vice president that is beyond not doing anything about it. She's actually joking about it. She's actually making a mockery out of it and saying and referring to that thing on the southwest border. As Stephanie, your other guest, has just mentioned the horrific aspects of human trafficking. We know about drugs coming across, killing tens of thousands of Americans every single year. Look, the threats are complex and multifaceted on our border. And that's why we've been saying since day one, when President Biden destroyed every effective tool and authority we had with the stroke of a political pen, we said our last line of defense to address our southwest border and secure it is going to be the states. You have the AG of Paxson of Texas, who went out days after and sued the administration and won. And now you have the attorney, now you have the governor, Abbott, that's coming out strong. Look, he has the ability, he has the authority to not only build the wall, but also enforce state law and secure our borders. And that's what he says he's going to do. I applaud his efforts. More states need to fall in line.
I want to ask you both a question, and I'll start with you, Stephanie, because I think you both have a unique aspect into this. Because when I was in the White House, I know, Mark, you saw it during your tenure, the media would report about these kids in cages, right? And we were detaining them, we were keeping them for their families. And one of the messages that I spread, I know, Mark, you did it, is exactly what Stephanie's dealing with. Guys, we don't know who these kids are. We don't know who the person is that's bringing the border. We need to make sure, first and foremost, that these kids are safe. Is the kids in cages narrative a mistake? Not a mistake, but is that underselling and making light of the problems that trafficking causes? Meaning that we're not doing it to harm a kid or actually put them in a cage, as the media would like to pretend, but actually making sure that we isolate them, find out who their appropriate guardian or parent is. Is that a message that's not getting through and resonating correctly with the people, Stephanie?
Yes, I agree, because you have to understand, like I had said earlier, these unaccompanied minors, these kids, they are going to be working for their cartel. The cartel's either going to sex traffic them, use child pornography, or they're going to be dealing to drugs for them. So yes, we have to vet every single person, no matter what. We have no idea what's coming into this country. When Mark was talking about the wall, I would love if we had a secure wall in Southern California. There are holes in the wall. People can drive through. There's tunnels. In fact, you may have noticed recently there's been a surge of panga boats all over Southern California. I live 32 miles from the border, and there are panga boats coming to shore in my backyard. They're coming everywhere. They will do anything to get and exploit children and humans. It's also human trafficking as well.
Mark, I mean, what about, do you think that we bumbled the message? What should we have been more focused on talking about what Stephanie's talking about and the problems that her organization is trying to solve?
Yeah, look, Sean, I think we did on the Trump administration. We pushed back, but we were also pushing back against mainstream media that was really an extension of the Democratic Party and open border advocates. That was a tough battle to fight. And we did our best. But look, remember, those so-called kids in cages, when were they built? Sean, you and I talked about this. They were built under the Obama administration, and they were done for the very reasons that you stated, Sean. Look, unaccompanied minors is from a baby to 17 years old. We had some that would come in, their fathers with kids, mothers with kids. We made sure we needed to separate them to make sure that they were being protected in our care before we turned them over to HHS. And they were separated by chain link fence. The only difference now, the picture you saw was instead of the chain link fence, it's plexiglass. But it's the same exact concept and the same facilities. But now it's plexiglass under this administration. It's okay. Chain link fence, it wasn't okay. It's just absurd.
Wow. Stephanie, before we go, you know, the crazy thing is you have the vice president saying we're trying to find the root cause. Yet when she went to go visit the president of Guatemala, he blamed the Biden administration and said, hey, you are the root cause. He didn't use his word, but he said you have caused this issue by the mixed messaging, and cartels are already down taking advantage of unaccompanied minors. They say they care about these kids. Yet, what is happening at our border and what we're seeing this surge, that is the mixed messaging. If they care about the children, then don't let them come in. Where is the disconnect for this administration on this issue?
Well, we've invited the vice president. In fact, Congressman Darrell Issa just invited her again. It's $1 billion business down here. No one has even offered to even come down to the border. We'll show you the border. We'll personally walk you down the border to show you what's going on. Unfortunately, they're closing the eyes to the issue, and this issue is growing exponentially, as I discussed. On every given day, there's 300,000 missing children in the United States, and 1/3, approximately 100,000, are now being trafficked.
Mark, I got 30 seconds left, but I've asked this to a lot of guests. Do you think this is intentional?
Absolutely, Sean. Absolutely, 100%. The Democratic Party sees a perceived political benefit, either through a bump in the House through the census, or they believe every illegal alien they find a pathway to citizenship is going to equate to a Democratic vote. It's politics and power. It's worse, and they're sacrificing our national security. Your viewers need to understand that.
That to me is, it's so blatantly obvious that I just wanted to make sure that everyone heard it from your mouth. Stephanie, Mark, thank you both for being here to highlight this important issue.
Thanks.
Thank you.
All right, stay with us. More Spicer & Company right after the break.
Well, many Americans have been able to work from home from the past year, but with the pandemic over, one boss says that's enough. During a conference on Monday, Morgan Stanley CEO James Gorman said this, quote, "If you want to get paid New York rates, you work in New York. None of this, I'm in Colorado and I work in New York and I'm getting paid like I'm sitting in New York. Sorry, that doesn't work." End of his quote. So he's giving workers until Labor Day, Sean, to return to the office, or they have to face a pay cut. The crazy thing about this, Morgan Stanley has had 70,000 employees work from home. So that's quite a few right now. Do you think that this is the right move by him?
Well, look, I think number one, whoever the employer gets to set the terms, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's the thing. You're the employee. To the extent that they want to be more competitive and say, hey, if you want a flexible schedule, but there's a point of going into the office. There's mentorship, there's camaraderie, there's collaboration, right? Not everything can be done over Zoom. I get it. And also, to his point, they pay people New York wages because New York costs a ton of money. If you're living in Maine and zooming in, then you're not getting, then they're paying you a New York wage when you're actually living large in Maine.
Right.
That's right.
But or like Ocala, a lot of people move to Texas. It's a lot cheaper to live, in the suburbs of some big city. And if you're getting, to your point, if you're getting this huge paycheck like you live in an expensive place, you're living like a king.
Yeah,
so of course you don't want to come back
like
into
the
the
government
office.
and the military and other places in the government, when you go somewhere, they give you per diem, right? That's the
Right.
amount based on how expensive it is in the
Where
area.
you're
You
traveling.
can't, right? They don't give you New York money if you're in Idaho, right? Where it might be cheaper. Not that there's some advantages there, but I think he's got a good point. You want to get New York wages, you got to be working in New York.
And I saw the other day that some of these companies are offering even a $30,000 incentive, and people don't want them. They would rather work at home because of commute,
I get it,
cost,
but there's
and
a thing
time.
between being flexible and saying you have to,
Yeah.
you may not have to come in 5 days a week anymore. That's probably in an employer's best interest. But I think this 5 days and we never see you is probably not going to last.
Or you get paid tons of money and get to live somewhere really cheap.
right,
I mean, that's a great point.
There's only so long a business can sustain that.
That's right. All right. Well, that's our show.
Hey, thanks for being part of our company. We look forward to seeing you right back here tomorrow.